right, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate an exercise that I want you to do with the 5-step scale that you made in the last video. And I'll explain on your assignment page about the setup and you know what kind of object to use for the setup. But basically, I've got a very simple setup. I have a dramatic light on it so that I've created a nice pattern of light and shadow. So in this case, I've got a pair. And my drawing is very simple, that angular drawing that I talked about. And I've made a very definite decision about the boundary between the light and shadow. And I want you to do that both on the pair and then with the cast shadow as well. So there's a form shadow on this object, and then there's its cast shadow, which is being thrown onto the ground plane. So just kind of map those out very clearly so that you can read the number of spaces you're going to be filling out with your paint. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, just 5 blocks of paint that I'm going to be putting in. So I want to be very clear about that. The other thing that I've done is I've pre-mixed my 5 values here. So I've got pure white, pure black, and then I mix up the 3 other values in between the two. When I did that, I put a little bit of retarder in, which keeps it wet on your palette. If you don't have the retarder, it's okay. You'll just have to mix up the values as you go. But the nice thing about having the retarder is that you can mix up a good amount, and so that you don't have to remix, because that's when problems arise sometimes, is when people are having to remix a particular value and they don't mix it up quite the same, and so you start getting a bunch of different values. So the key with this exercise is to try to keep things really simple and really contained to these 5 values that you've laid out already. All right. So in starting, I'm going to, on a white piece of paper, it kind of makes sense to start with some dark values, because in order to create the sense of light and shadow, you need lights and darks. And we already have light on the paper, right? So it makes sense to start with the dark. So I'm going to start somewhere with one of these 2 shadows that I've got on here. And when I look up here and I look at my 5-step scale, I just want to gauge what do I think this is the closest to. Like, I'm not going to be able to match it exactly, because these 5 values are not going to, none of them is going to fit perfectly. But so this becomes more of a relational study. So given these limitations, what's the closest big picture in terms of how it relates to the other values up there is the value of this shadow on the pair. So when I look up there, I say, okay, well, I've got something darker here, and then something lighter next to it, something really light here. So I'm not gonna go with the darkest dark, because this is darker than this. So I may go with this number 4 value or this number 3 value. So either one would work. So I'm gonna go with a 4. And I'm going to use 2 brushes. It's good to separate your really lighter values from your darker values. Even though we can clean the brush in between, it's not a bad idea to just have a brush that you're using for the lighter side of the scale and one for the darker. So I'm just going to go into my pile of paint here, and I'm just going to block in this area that I've already laid out. And so when I do that, I'm going to sort of mass in, and again, use a good amount of paint so that you're covering. Like, don't be stingy with the paint. You want to get the feeling that the paint is flowing on to the canvas, and you're not having to sort of scratch it over a large surface. And also notice that I'm doing what's called I'm painting against the outline. So in other words, there's going to be a really strong tendency for you to always let the brush go along the outline. So to paint this way along this outline. Practice going against the outline. What that does is it gives you a little bit more sense that you're making a shape. You're not making the outline of a pear. You're putting in a block of tone that, when it goes against another block of tone, is going to create this illusion of a pear. So if I'm always painting along the outline, there's a tendency to sort of get into the mindset that you're actually making the thing, and we're not doing that. We're putting together paint shapes to give the illusion of that thing. All right. So I've blocked that in. It looks a little dark to me, but it's surrounded by all this white. And so let's just go on and see how it ends up working. So So when I put this in, the next thing I don't want to do really is go to the light side. Again, I want to try to keep myself from becoming too object oriented. I want to see this almost in a naive way, like these are just these shapes of value that I've never seen before. I'm going to put them together. So I'm going to purposely have you avoid completing one object at a time. So if I go to the light of the pair now and put that in, then with the shadow I've completed the pair. I've sort of made the pair. So I'm going to purposely not do that. And I'm going to go to a value block that's next to this so that I can start building a relationship, right? So I don't want to go from here, say like over to here, because if it doesn't connect with that in some way, if it doesn't meet it out there in nature, then I'm not going to get quite as good a read on how those two values are working as if I put one value next to another. So a good place to go is this block right here, which is right next to that one. So for that, I'm going to put in my darkest dark there. So that's the black. And again, that's not black up there, but again, it's about these relationships. So given these 5 values, what's the best sort of block of relationships that I can create? And the more you simplify your palette, so we've got a pretty simple palette here, the further from nature you're going to be at the end in terms of actually describing the literal values that you see. So it's really important to think of this as kind of finding relationships, a certain set of relationships up there. Given these limitations, how can I create the same set of relationships? Okay. So from here, I'm going to go to here because this is next to this, and I can get 3 values next to one another. So when I look at that value there, okay, this value is lighter than this one, and it's lighter than this one too, but it's darker than this one and it's darker than that one. So that leads me to go to this middle step here. So I'm going to go there and say, okay, if I put this in and I put this right next to this value. And also important, like as you block in these tones to, oops, went to the wrong patch, I think there. As you block in these tones, to make sure that you're making one value shape come right up against the other. Not to mix into it, but try to let them come right next to one another. Don't leave any white gaps between them because you're going to be able to read the relationships better if one tonal shape comes right up against the other. And as I do this, I'm also going to get rid of my drawing lines that I put in. All right, so now I've got three values established. So I can start seeing, okay, yeah, these sort of work okay. All right, so this shape in here, now I can put this next to this one, or I can go to this one. Now this is pretty light, so that's probably going to be my number 1. I'm just going to leave that probably the white of the page. So I've just got this one left, which I don't have any choice but to go to that number 2 step, which is, that's going to be darker than this, but lighter than this, right? So that makes sense to do that. So things are kind of working out okay for me, given this limited palette. It may not be quite as easy or quite as clear depending on the value of the objects that you put up in yours. So you're just going to have to make the best choice possible. And sometimes what will happen is you may have 2 of these value shapes that are coming up against one another that have to be the same. And that's okay. What'll happen is you'll sort of lose a little part of your painting. So like if I made this the same as this, I would lose the definition of those 2 forms along that area where they meet. And that's okay at the beginning. In fact, that's actually helpful as a painter to see visually where like values are connecting. It may not be clear why, but I'll talk about that later. So here I'm going to block in this value, and again, going against the outline. I'm not going absolutely with the outline. Trying to get rid of my drawing lines as best I can. And if you don't have a perfect line, a perfect edge, if it's a little deckled, that's okay. Like, it doesn't have to be, the illusion's going to be there. You can actually get pretty sloppy with the drawing, but if you, not that I want you to get sloppy with the drawing, but if it does get a little sloppy, if you hit these value notes correctly, it's going to, it's going to ring true in terms of how it's suggesting nature. All right, so here I've established these relationships, and I'm going to just come in with my white and kind of clean up the shapes a little bit, get rid of the drawing line. So at the end of this, you want one value coming up against the other value. You don't want your drawing lines to be there. So when you're starting with black, you're going to have these fairly heavy drawing lines, and you're just going to as you block in these tones, just make a point of trying to eradicate the drawing lines. Again, you don't get any points for getting a really razor sharp, clear edge. So again, allow yourself to go against the outline. So even here where I'm coming in and cleaning up this outline, I'm going like this along this outline rather than going along the pear. It's almost like we're creating these, not tight, but definite shapes, but they're not. They don't have this razor's edge. They're sort of like these floating planes of color that are coming together, or floating planes of tone in this case, coming together and creating the illusion. Okay. So now, so I've got my 5 values, and when I look at this and I look up there, I can see some differences. So in other words, when I look up here, I can say, okay, well this value should really be a little bit closer to that white. Like it's a little dark. Within these limitations, I've chosen the right one, but it's a little dark, and that's okay. We're not going to be able to match exactly what we see. But if we had, a bigger scale, say, like if we went to 7 or a 9-step scale, I would have the choice that would allow me to come back and change that and go to a lighter value. But given what I have, I would have to make up like a 6-step in the scale, and I don't want you to do that. I want you to just, when you mix up your original values, just go with those. Even if they don't match your scale exactly, that's okay. As long as you've got 5 distinct values, we're using those to create a set of relationships that are intended to mimic the relationships, not mimic exactly, but to suggest the relationships that we see up there. Okay, and then that's it. You don't have to take it any further. You're basically just sort of filling in those simple 5 or 6 shapes of light and dark that you mapped out in your drawing.